Do, do, do. Do, 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 do. Just posting things elsewhere. Hey there! Just gonna get a few more things. Set you. And 3, 2, 1. When should a character die if players don't want him to die? Well, okay, jumping right into the main question, are we? So yeah, so that's kind of what I would talk about for this first section here, where, I mean, for like the main sections of, my whatchamacallits, my Lily's Library's Lives is kind of like the format of kind of my other videos on my channel. And this one is going to be talking about, we're talking about character deaths and how to handle character deaths. There was a couple of threads on, Twitter, one of which by Kelly Diggs, one of the former Magic writers, talking about different ways to handle character death and things like that. And it's a really nuanced topic, and it's one of those things that everyone has a different opinion on how it should work and how it should happen and stuff like that. So yeah, so we're gonna be talking about that. Also, I have stuff to shuffle in my hands because I just like having something to do with my hands. I finally actually sleeved my Plane Chase deck, so I can actually shuffle it. But these are like so big. It's like, it's so hard to shuffle these, and I have pretty big hands for my size, but yeah. So, words that mean things. So yeah, so character death. I mean, this is gonna be very freeform and more interactive-y than like I do my normal, like, DMing Basic series, because, well, obviously the DMing Basic series aren't live, so they can't really interact with people. But, I also might turn this into it eventually actually into a proper DMing Basics video, because I think it is an important topic, and I also just kind of want to work through my thoughts, because there's a lot of ways to do it from there. Words that mean things. Yes. So the main thing is like character death. Like, let's talk about like from a very like high end, like what happens when a character dies, and for the purpose of this discussion, we are mostly going to be talking about D&D and similar types of games. That said, pretty much how every system, tabletop RPG system you're running, is gonna handle death a little differently. Just because all of them just function different. Like, some have death more integral to its like central thing, and let's just start with a little bit of history, because back, like, nowadays, death is, there has been this leaning and kind of like very shying away for death. There's lots of systems in place in current systems to make it that, like, it's actually really hard for a character to just permanently die. Both with tools that like suggestions for like the DMs can do, and that's a contentious issue of like, that's a hot button issue if you talk to D&D people, being like, is it right for DMs to fudge rolls if they would outright kill a character and things like that? And that's, I think there's good arguments on both sides of that, and I'll get into that later, my opinions on that. But it's very much like, in recent years, D&D has kind of really shifted into being very story-based and character-based, which is a departure from first, like original D&D, AD&D, and even large parts of 3rd edition D&D, where early D&D and like mid D&D was very brutal. It was all about like, you would go like, characters would die left and right, and it was rough. You would die a lot, and there's a certain aspect of this is kind of like the culture of people playing D&D at those times. Like, that's when you get like the stereotypes of like the nerds and stuff in the basement and things like that, and like the social outcast geeks and stuff. And it's one thing I've noticed that has and it was very much, it was more focused on the mechanics of the game and the mechanics of that, and the story stuff was important, but like, it was always there, but the emphasis on the story is something that has really developed over the last 10 plus years, where D&D hasn't been has kind of shifted from this place of story supporting the rules and like giving them like a nice fleshed out, to being the rules are what is there to support the story. And with that, the game as a whole, and obviously this changes from group to group and person to person and DM to DM, but it has become a lot more story driven and specifically character driven, where, sorry about that, like, if you're talking about, like, you're playing, like, AD&D in the 90s, and you're like, okay, yeah, like, and you're just like, okay, here's my character, I'm playing this is my character, Jared, he's a human ranger there. Jared dies, and it isn't the end of the world, because Jared had story with him, he might have had things, but Jared was there to be the ranger in the party. He was like, I'm just like the backline DPS, like that. But like, that same character in like a current game is much like, it's much more tied into the integral of what the campaign is about. Jared, like, there's much more things tied into Jared. I think there's this much more emphasis for DMs to tie in aspects of the character and stuff into the characters that they're talking, like, each one. And Jared dying is a lot more disruptive to the campaign. I can imagine the develop has its origin in so bad and yeah, no, definitely. And I'm not really here to talk about like the shift from being like a very mechanics-based game to more narrative and role-playing. And because there's a lot of cool things you can look at that, because as you see it moving out of being like, because it's like, yes, like women and other like minorities have always played D&D, but it's recently been moving out of like the control, like it's never really been like made with their concerns in mind and stuff. And you see this in a lot of fandoms, the difference between creative fandom and archival or like information-based fandom. Where you see these like two different ideas of like when people are into things. You have the group which is predominantly you see men doing this, and these are broad categorizations, but it's the information, like they show that they're really into a topic by knowing a lot, by knowing everything there is about like the official stuff about it. And that kind of translates very well over to like this mechanical, like, I want to know this edition, I want to tinker with the numbers and things like that, and be good at this game and know what things there are to do. And on the other side of it, you see creative fandom, where I'm really into this thing and I want to make my own stuff in relation to that thing. That's where you see things like fan art and fan fiction. A lot of things you see generally disparaged in modern culture and stuff, being like, oh, that's not real XYZ. But you see that primarily rising when you're looking at women and other minorities engaging in those fandoms, because those fandoms don't necessarily cater to their space and who their own experiences, and you have to create your own things, and that leads to this much more story-driven kind of experience. Because like, even while D&D has shaped itself to be more like much more inclusive, the experience of people who come from that place is that even if that creative aspect of fandom isn't necessary for what we're doing, and like we do see ourselves reflected in it, and like that's still how we know how to engage with something. And yeah, and that's how we want to like show that. But I'm really off topic. I'm not talking about character death, but nowadays, but when that is, that character death is this contentious issue, because back when it was just dungeon crawl and everything, and when Jared would die, he died, and there's that, and like, it sucks, you lose some progress, you get like some amount of emotional attachment to that character, but it wasn't disruptive to the game, and people kind of went into like AD&D and 3.0 games kind of the expectation that your character can just die, and that's it, you're gone, roll a new one. But nowadays, that isn't the base assumption, and the expectation is not for that, and that's not a bad thing. Like, expectations of how a game is supposed to work is okay to change and morph, and people get much more attached to their characters. Stories become more interwoven with their characters because of that. I think, for me personally, and how I like to experience the game, I see that as a net good thing. Like, yeah, sure, like, but then, words mean things, but you just can't take out death altogether, because death has story purposes, and death has this thing of like, why does being good in combat matter if the risk of death isn't there? And therein lies this problem where death is super disruptive and cannot be as rampant as it was before. But we still need to feel like there is that threat, and there's this feeling of words that mean things. Like, there's an important aspect of that, the game aspect. Like, I refute this, but like, the definition of a game is that does this game have a loss state? And you need that loss state, and I would like, and this is what I'm talking about, like, in modern D&D, from what we are talking about, where the characters are important, the characters are crucial and the center of parts, people are emotionally invested in those characters. How do you handle character death? And let's do the easiest one. Let's talk about scripted deaths. Because scripted deaths, I consider things like, this isn't like, oh, you just got stabbed by 1d6 goblins and now you're dead. This is going to happen outside of a combat, outside of dice rolls. It isn't necessarily in there, where it's like a story moment of like, yes, I must sacrifice myself to act as like this conduit that will save the town, or something like that, where it is like this big dramatic moment of sacrifice or like fall or something. And the best way to handle this is the player that's going to die, talk to them beforehand. Like, I say it too much in my like DMing basic videos, but talk to your players. It's very important to communicate. But for big moments like this, like, talk about like being like, and typically also general, you should check in with your players in general. And one of the things when I check in with players is talk about like, hey, are you happy with your character? And if I feel like, how do you feel like your character's development is going and things like that. And if I feel like that either the player is not enjoying the character as much as they were before, or if the kind of character growth or the character stories had kind of stagnated or things like that, or if the character is, for one reason or the other, not like meshing well with the rest of the group, or is otherwise disruptive to the story itself, I will talk to them and ask, like, would you like to entertain the possibility of taking your character out of the picture? And for any of the reasons, like, this is the best way to do it, just to talk to the player beforehand. And once you're doing that, like, once you be like, also for this sort of thing, for killing a character, it doesn't have to be actually death for in this sense. It could be them leaving, or some other, they have like their character some other engagement and they're leaving the group. But death is one of those options. Like, for all intensive purposes, they're dead. They are no longer in the group, they're no longer in the party. The only characters in my game mates who ever died were either killed in PvP, it was a terrible group mechanic, or got resurrected soon after. Death isn't really meaningful. Feel meaningful? Yeah, that's a problem. I'll get to resurrection in a moment, because when I'm talking about that. Because the thing is, for that one, while I was talking about, like, actually bringing up resurrection for that, is that resurrection usually isn't an issue in that. Where, okay, they have resurrected themselves, like, if you're purposely choosing to be like, I am sacrificing myself, like, this is the story moment, and like, either you plan how it's exactly gonna happen with the player, or you kind of like be like, you will know when it's time, and I, the DM, will figure out that empty lead to like bring your character, like set your character off. And I like the latter option because it makes the situation a bit more emotional. I don't know exactly when it's happening or exactly how it's gonna happen, and it lets them get a bit more engaged in the moment as it's happening. Also not having to spoil any story things. And that's all well and good. But the thing is, for a story-based game, that way of exiting a character is the easy way. Because it's like, things like resurrection. It's like, this was a story-based kill-off, like, for what, either arbitrary or non-arbitrary reasons, resurrection just doesn't happen, and things like that. So, what about the deaths you don't plan for? These are the deaths where the player does something, like, it's either like, let's talk about like the first scenario, the most common one. You're in a fight, one of the characters dies, they make their last death saving throw, they reach enough negative hit points, and they die, and they're dead. How do you handle this? The first way that a lot of DMs do is they don't actually have them die. When the big baddie scores a nasty critical hit on them, oh no, it's just a normal hit. Because this is a common thing for like the rolling behind the DM screen and things like that, and it can help conceal die rolls, and oh, they're not really dead. And there are arguments that like, oh, that I don't really buy into, being like, oh, you shouldn't do that because it validates like the social contract between the players and the DM, and you're breaking the rules of the game in order to have more manipulation of the story, and I don't buy that. As the DM, it's your job to facilitate the story, but that said, fudging the rules doesn't always work, because after a while, if your players never feel like they're in danger, they, like, it's hard to, words that mean things, sorry. If the players feel like they're in danger, there's a point where combat stops feeling meaningful, and things like that. And also, colloquially, they start taking larger risks, which then makes the chances of something accidentally happening larger, because they're like, oh yeah, we can take that, we have plot armor or whatever. And maybe taking unnecessary risks and things like that, which makes you, if you're fudging the die rolls the whole time and all of a sudden they're fighting things that they shouldn't be fighting for 5 levels, and that's how you're going to keep them alive, it leads in that situation where groups get a bit too bravado if they don't feel the threat of death. So, someone's messaging me. No, they're not. How do I do that? So I will admit I do sometimes fudge die rolls. Mostly though, I fudge them when it would be like it's less because like, oh, I'm in danger of them dying, but more because it would be too disruptive to the current story to have them die here. Like especially just like or something like not so much disruptive, but it'd be too disruptive to this pace of the current setting. So, like a thing where I have sessions where like the session is dragging, we gotta get through this combat quick, and having their main DPS go down drag this combat out. And I made the decision to not have that crit hit them and not have the fight drag out for another hour. And that's when I fudge rolls. I don't usually fudge rolls otherwise. And then you get to the situation of, okay, you're not fudging rolls, you're not pulling punches, they go down a lot. And the thing is about 5th edition especially, and also 4th edition to a certain extent, is that it's actually really hard to die. Like, once you're down, unless an enemy is specifically going after you to kill you, it's kind of hard to die. Unless it's very early in the fight, no one can get to you. It wasn't like half the party went down at once. Which I think is kind of an issue in 5th edition, where it is hard for one person in the party to die unless they get exceptionally separated or something like that. But if the party is any semblance of being good at tactics and like keeping track of their positioning, it's either one person will die or almost everyone will die. It's no one will die or almost everyone will die in 5th edition, which is a bit of an issue. Like, it just takes so long to die once you're down, and it's kind of easy to get them back up if you need to, which is good and bad. Like, I feel like forgetting the scare of, oh crap, I might die here, knocking your players unconscious is a great way to do that. And in 5th edition, because it is actually kind of hard to kill a character, don't feel bad to pull the punches dropping the first few characters in combat. Like, if you don't have a philosophical problem with like fudging dice rolls, know that 1 or 2 characters going down in the combat doesn't end the combat, and it does make the stakes feel real. It makes the combat feel real exciting. It's not like a character doesn't have to get to like, ooh, 2 failed death saves to feel that specter of death. To make that feel real. So, like, having one character go down is honestly a good thing every once in a while. I mean, conversely, don't make every single fight, like, the point where 2 people are going down at different points in the combat and they feel like they're scraping by every fight by the skin of their teeth. Unless that's the campaign you're going for, but that's tiring after a while. This is really scattered, and this is why I normally have notes when I do this for DMing Basic series, but I haven't done notes for this one. Words that mean things. What was I talking about? But yeah, so it's like, especially if you're running 5th edition, and honestly 4th edition to a certain extent, there's that. Okay, so let's say, okay, you did that, and somehow a character did die. And like, it's just like it's one character that died. We'll get to that, because that's the tricky one. The easier one to handle is, what if the party gets defeated? What if you get the dreaded TPK, the total party kill? Although, for the most part, a TPK usually ends with maybe one of the players being dead. shouldn't high combat difficulty be realized by different enemies? I'm not talking about fudge dice rolls in the favor of mobs. I'm talking about not being, like, don't feel bad when you crit their guy and they go down. Like, I'm not talking about making the mobs more powerful than you fudging them. Yeah, getting the right, like, combat difficulty is important. Also, no, if you have an unpopular player, you should talk to the player. Yeah, no, I'm just talking, it's more kind of like, don't feel like a character going unconscious is, I feel like a lot of DMs, especially newer DMs, feel that, like, knocking them unconscious is the same as dead, but the same thing you remind the players when you, like, when they are like, oh no, I'm dead. It's like, no, you're unconscious, you're fine, you're not dead. It's really hard to die from unconscious, unless they're really separated, or the party is incompetent. But the TPK, the dreaded TPK. The most obvious situation, like, this one is the awkward one, because it is the most disruptive if the outcome is they all die. It is super disruptive if they just all die. Like, because it's like everything in the campaign so far has, like, been built up, and you're essentially starting a new campaign at that point. And yes, there are cool stories about, like, oh, there was a TPK, then we started a new campaign, and we went to a similarly looking dungeon and do things like that. You gotta talk to them and make sure thing. No, we're not talking about Game of Thrones. Because I don't watch Game of Thrones or read it, or I'm just not a fan of Game of Thrones. It's not my thing. But everyone dying, like, it can be very easy that, like, everyone dying is objectively a bad thing. Like, so, and there are some situations where it is inescapable that everyone just dies. Like, words, I mean things. Yeah, like, it all matters on the system. Hey there. Very much so. So, there's a few ways to handle this. One, and this one is very dependent on what killed them. Like, was it a group of bandits? Okay, they didn't die. They are now just gonna be held hostage. Like, if they're local heroes, the bandits don't want to kill them. That's gonna just spur the ire of the local village. No, let's kidnap them, ransom them off, get some money, and you get to do a fun, like, then that, like, will change up. Hey, there's Dr. Suplex. And it's like, okay, then you move into, like, this hostage situation where you have to, like, do a jailbreak or something like that. Alternatively, they die. Like, a lot of situations kind of can fall into that, and you have to play it by ear. But there will be situations where it's like, okay, it just doesn't work, because they all died. And one of them is, like, say they were just, like, attacked by a pack of owlbears. It's like, the owlbears aren't going to show mercy. They're just going to eat them. And that can be an awkward situation. And honestly, if you reach the point of TPK, one thing I recommend, like, if you have in the session, like, typically, I don't know, for me, I don't start sessions of combat, and, like, assuming it's, like, not within, like, the first hour of the session, or people are cool with that, when there's a TPK, I would end the session. Or, I mean, in the D&D session. You don't have to go home. You don't have to send everyone else, like, get out of my house. You died. You don't get to be here anymore. I mean, you can still, like, play board games or something, or talk about the campaign itself. But this gives you some time to think about how you want to handle this, and figuring out how you want it to work. Yeah, because it's one of those things where depending on what killed them or what everything's, you can figure out what happened. Like, does it make sense for the campaign of, like, oh yes, like a local, like, hero or warrior came in and was able to, like, fend off the last of, like, the owlbears at the last moment, or for some reason the angel of the cleric kind of, like, came in and, like, do that and things like that. and like save them or whatever. And the thing is that there's lots of ways to do it, and it's very context based on how they died and what is going on in the campaign, and you can kind of find that situation. But there should be consequences. One thing I would do is, like, in that situation, which would be talk to each individual player and ask, would you be okay if, like, assuming like it is okay for the story, would you be okay with your character dying? And if you kill off, like, I feel like those situations, like, assuming they're like not all taken hostage or something, like having one or two of the characters die. Okay, railroad TPKs, I don't really consider those TPKs. Those are more just like a plot point where it's like, okay, now they're going to go to the ghost world, and that's how they get to the ghost world. So I don't really consider it about a TPK. That's just like a plot device, and it's neat. But yeah, that one is like, it's less of an issue because it's planned. I mean, you have to handle it right and to like be sure to not make sure your players freak out. They're being like, oh no, we're all dead. But yeah, but talk to your players and be like, how would you feel about your character dying here? And this is a way to turn like this TPK and like other consequences happen. Like the players who don't die can suffer consequences. They can have like lose limbs or have other like physical impairments. The group that came in and saved them, like, they're now beholden to this group. The angel, which like one of the paladins gods sent to save them, but it's like, okay, you did this, but now we have we're gonna put a geese on you, and you have to go complete this quest for us for thing, and like might sidetrack you from your main goal, and essentially add story consequences. And if you have like one or two of the players like actually dying, this can add additional things that you can do to kind of like add to the story, even if it slows down their eventual goals. And having one or two characters dies switches it to being like, okay, how do we handle those deaths the same way you would handle if one or two characters died in a fight outside of TPK. So the first thing you need to ask yourself is resurrection. It is the elephant in the room when you're talking about characters dying. Because like once like D&D characters anywhere like at mid to high levels, resurrection is a very powerful tool. And the thing is that the base rules do have penalties for being raised from the dead and things like that, but they honestly aren't, in the long term, they aren't super harrowing. So you need to figure out, how does resurrection work in your world? And some worlds are just outright, no, resurrection does not exist outside of extreme circumstances. And the way I usually run resurrection in my campaigns, including generic RPG, which is a little bit weird, but typically the resurrection spells generally don't work in my campaign. Just because, I'm not saying that resurrection doesn't exist, but resurrection is much less of a find a cleric, cast the spell sort of deal, and more like, if you want this character back, you need to go on a quest to do X, Y, and Z. Because like resurrection, like in the description of resurrection, there's a lot of things that like have to happen, and like you can change any of these aspects to kind of like figure out how to if the player is like, I really don't want to die like long term. And we had this happen. The character of Irene Alzerin in generic RPG, she died just to a bunch of town guards after the group incited some violence, and they were at fault, but they were fighting some town guards, and Irene died. She was the party's ranger. She died, and she was dead. they had her body. They brought it to a temple, and they were like, okay, but it's like, what would it take to resurrect her? And they were like, I can't find her soul. I phoned up the sun god, which was her god, and her soul has not arrived, so we don't know where her soul is. So they had to do a full quest of where is her soul, and how can they get it back to her body, and it took honestly several months out of game and in-game time to actually find her soul and get it back into the body. It set their quest back honestly significant amount of time to get Irene back. And in the meantime, like the player, Irene's player, like brought in a different character. They were playing Ina, who was who had like connections to Irene, but like wasn't like and things like that. But they got all together and they eventually got her back. But and this is how I generally recommend running Resurrection. Of don't make it a spell, except or it can be a spell but require all the components, where it's you have to because like the three major things to think. You need the body. Like, it's important. You gotta have a body to raise from the dead to have the dead. If you don't have the body, different things can happen to the body where and there's several ways to run this, and I'm getting to the point where it's like sometimes a character will just die, and we'll get to that. You need a body. So either you have to find the body, like if it was like in the dungeon, they have to fight their way back into the dungeon and get the body to be able to raise from the dead, and it might need repairs, it might be severely damaged when they get back, but you have to have the body. I've seen it where the body was destroyed, it was gone, and there's a few ways to do this. Canonically, like, well, it's in the rules, you can use a wish to restore the body of a person. Other things, you could do it where you make like, okay, but here's the quest, we're going to make a simulacrum for their soul to reside in, because we need their soul back. That's the important part. So we're gonna like make a vessel for their soul to take place in, and like essentially when they get raised from the dead, they're the same thing, except they're also like, but instead they're like a warforged or something as their race instead of that. And that is another way it can work. And obviously it changes from campaign to campaign and what would work or what wouldn't work. And there are situations where it's like, yeah, the body is gone and you can't do it no matter what. Okay, another restriction is they have to want to come back. And this is one that usually isn't like a quest thing that you go around, because if the character doesn't want to come back, that usually means the player doesn't want them to come back, at which point, why are you trying to bring them back? So that is an issue. But in order to raise them from the dead, you need the person's consent. That's my life lesson for you. Just make sure you have consent before raising someone from the grave. As dead, or as actual resurrection or undead, you should probably have consent before raising someone from the dead with necromancy. That's also probably true. Like the donating your body to science type deal, but you're donating your body to necromancy. Yeah, that, I don't know. Just have consent. Just in general in life, that's a good thing to make sure whatever you're doing, the person you're doing it to is cool with it, and yeah, they'll save you a lot of thing. Oh yeah, totally. Yeah, you can like do different things. Like if you are kind of like an evil party and stuff, and you're like and you're like the wizard died and you're like reasonably high power, it's like, okay, they're dead. We're gonna get their soul. We're gonna make them a lich. Let's go. But yeah, so that is a possibility. Yes. Exactly. Also, I am very warm. These lights are hot. What was I gonna say? Oh yeah, I'm so ripped. Yeah. No, I'm actually super out of shape. I used to like actually have muscle mass back when I like did martial arts and stuff, but now I don't. I need to shave my armpits. I just showed that on camera on a live stream. Okay, I'm stupid. What was I talking about? Okay, and the third thing you need is you need their soul. And typically within like the standard D&D cosmology, the soul goes to usually like the equivalent of whatever like the Shadowfell is, and then it goes on to like the realm of their god if they follow a god. If they don't, it just kind of goes on. So if it just goes on, you do have kind of a time limit where you gotta do it within a certain amount of time. If it goes to a god's realm, you have to have the consent of that god. That god might send you on a quest being like, yes, this soul needs to rest, but I understand that I need it back, but if you're going to do that, I need you to recover one of my holy relics that have been captured by these demon worshippers. And things like that. The thing that happened with Irene that they did is that her soul got intercepted when she was going there, and they had to go and fight their way into the Drow City where the Spider Queen had intercepted her soul in an effort to lure them there, and stuff. So that was the thing there, where finding their soul or getting like the permission to use their soul, by not them themselves, but like by whoever's in possession of it. If they are a warlock, they're if they are a warlock, you might have a they're probably beholden to one of many beings, like the devil that they made a contract with, or the fae being, or whatever. They are probably in possession of their soul, and you're probably gonna have to make a negotiation for that if you want it back. But the main thing I'm getting at is that if you want to have a resurrection media thing, make a quest out of it. Make it so the entire party has to work to get this character back. And I think that is one of the best ways to make death impactful for the entire group. Because death isn't a consequence for just the player who died. It's the whole group's responsibility to keep the group alive, and it's the whole group's like loss when a character does die. More God voice, please. I should really just do a stream that's like me doing all of like my voices that I do in generic RPG, because like I go a lot on them. I don't really know which ones would be ASMR friendly, but yeah. Yeah, I'm not gonna do that right now. Another day. Okay, you know what? Next week's Lily's Library Live will be me doing voices that I do, like my D&D voices. The full first hour is just gonna be Lily D&D voices. It will not be an ASMR live stream, because my voices for that are not all ASMR. But actually, my like general like ASMR gate here is actually one of the voices I use. Hi, this is my voice for Gwendolyn Brightheart. I'm the party wizard's girlfriend, but he's a complete idiot, and I was also secretly a gold dragon. But, yeah, no, my persona is just this shy and reserved halfling, because no one expects me to be a dragon. Yes. But yeah, no, the quest to regain it. And, it's interesting. Granted, also at the same time, there typically is, like, should be, like, personal aspects of this, and, like, death, like, because it's the point where it's, like, you can reach a point where the character, doesn't, like, having, like, for something like this, they don't actually have to die, but any situation where they would die, and this is one of the things that Kelly Diggs recommended, in his thread. I would link it, but there's no good way for me to link it, and also I'd have to find it and stuff like that, was taking the player aside when they would die and pretty much saying, do you want to die? If no, ask them, how will this permanently change your character? Be it mental, like physical, whatever. How is this experience of this extremely near-death experience going to change your character? And stuff like that. No, she was a halfling dragon. She was a dragon shape-shifted into a halfling. Because she was hiding from the Dragon King. The evil Dragon King. Who I have not revealed my voice yet for, and I've been practicing, but the group has not met the Dragon King yet, and oh, I am so excited for them to meet the Dragon King. But yeah, no, so, but like, kind of like talking about like different near-death experiences. Like, I've done this sometimes with like my players where I didn't just give them a choice, like Jolt, the idiotic wizard that no one likes. I mean, I like Jolt. Everyone in the group makes fun of Jolts because he is the worst wizard who would ever walk the earth. But I love him. He is an adorable idiot, and I love him. But yeah, no, that's what I'm like. But he was an idiot and like ran into melee and with some dryads and like got completely demolished because he's a wizard. And what are you doing on the front lines? You are a wizard. Stop trying to melee things, Jolt. That is not your job. God, no. Stop already. No. No. This is the same wizard who lightning bolted a blue dragon, and I was like, that didn't work. Let me use another lightning spell against it. Maybe that will work better. Turns out, no, Jolt. Blue dragons are resistant to lightning. It shot lightning at you last turn. What are you doing? Gosh. I love Jolt so much. He is such an idiot. Yeah, no, he just got demolished and he lost his arm. He just arm clean off. And then later on he had a fae regrow the arm, and there was going to be some consequences that came up in the story later on. But then some of the stories have happened, and that the fae being that gave him the arm died. So that happened. Was that kind of got dropped. But like there are different ways. Like one thing to look at is I don't think this is showing my ignorance. 5th edition. Does 5th edition have flaws? I don't think it does. I'm pretty sure it's just a Pathfinder 3.5 thing. But looking at those are good. Because flaws are essentially these things which are negative traits that you usually can take because you get extra like either traits or like things like that are like penalties. And like picking up like a flaw is a really good way to just like mechanically handle. It's like you almost died. You take this flaw. You have -1 to all your melee attack rolls forever because you're just terrified in melee range and stuff. And that is something that like isn't backbreaking, but it hurts. It really hurts, like especially giving that. So yeah, so that's one thing to look at. And while 5th edition doesn't have it, both Pathfinder and 3.5, 3.5 has it in the book Unearthed Arcana, and the 3.5 ones are actually kind of brutal and they're very punishing, and those are the ones I would base potentially like a drawback from, because the 3.5 ones essentially because like in Pathfinder is like, okay, you can take a flaw to get an extra trait, which were like minor bonuses. In Unearthed Arcana again 3.5, you took a flaw, you got a bonus feat, so that's super powerful and super amazing, but they were also extremely punishing, and I would look at those. So yeah, and obviously like as just like guidelines for things that could like have that like lasting like consequences for the character. And yeah, no, I don't really know what else to say so far on the topic. But like in summary, it's like, it's one of those things where the best way I find to handle it is to just talk to the player. And I always say that at the end of each of these, like talking about these topics, where it's like, you gotta talk to the player, because you do. It is super thing. You really have nothing to do with this game stuff, but I love the tingles I get from streams. The hand touchdowns are great. My favorite thing is tapping noises. Oh, totally. Everyone's triggers are their triggers. You don't really have control on what your triggers are. Stepping noises are not intentional. If you can hear them, it's because I just wolf down a plate of nachos before I went on stream because it's like, I'm hungry. I need to eat something fast. Cheese nachos. No. And it's done. Yeah. Also, cheese nachos are really nice because the salt dries out my mouth. And I hate when editing hearing like the saliva in my mouth. I hate eating videos. They're the worst to me. It's like, yeah. But if the salt, it dries out my mouth with saliva, so it isn't quite as like moist. Of course, I'm like drinking iced tea while I'm here, which completely messes up everything. But yeah. But yeah, no. But I like handling it through story consequences, and that is, it doesn't work for every campaign. But I think the campaign that handles death the worst is story-based campaigns, and make it story-based consequences being the primary thing, where it sets their things out. You know, obviously there can be issues with that, where you're disrupting the pace of the campaign, like you were gearing up for this big fight, but now you gotta go do whatever. But you're also choosing how long the resurrection thing happens, and you can also be kind of like upfront, like I would have them discover like what it would take to resurrect them very quickly, and then have them make the call, like, is this worth the amount of effort to resurrect the person? Oh, one thing I also noted, that even if you have all the two things, the soul, the body, like the soul, access to the soul, the body, and things like that, and we're like, oh, there's no problems, like we should be able to resurrect this guy. You can always have extra story-based, like, arbitrary things, like, oh yes, but the ritual you need requires the special flower which grows on the mountain, but just dragon guarded by this dreaded ogre mage, and things like that. I had a great story journey. We got real. We just have character desk for a short campaign, party for Pathfinder. Had a movie night, yeah. Oh, thank you for coming. But yeah, no. Yeah, okay. Oh yeah, no. Player leaving the group IRL is like really rough to deal with. But the thing is also just, even for story-based campaigns, is that while I am not an advocate for random character death, like in writing and stuff, or like just being like, oh, I'm gonna kill this character and they'll never see it coming, it can be a useful tool for kind of like shaking up, like if the campaign feels like it's gotten stale for one reason or another, or it's slowed down, or the party dynamic has gone stale, that sometimes a character dying can actually be beneficial to the campaign, even if it doesn't seem like it could be like, oh, we're gonna have to drop some story threads and things like that. But it isn't always the end of the world, and you can make it work. And yeah, I think that's about wrapping up what I have to say on this topic. Does anyone have any questions or comments on what about character death in general? Because that's how I handle it. Have combat energy and fallen. Oh, in the middle of combat. Eek. Oh yeah, no, totally. I kind of handle it for like treasure and stuff. It's like when I dish out treasure, it's very specific to each player, so it's like that player carries their treasure, and I don't really unless it's something out of the ordinary, I don't really have a player like care about carrying limits too much. But he's on the mountain guarding some arbitrary flower of plot convenience. But essentially when a character goes, they just lose all their own personal like wealth and magic items and stuff, because when you roll a new character, you get all that stuff anyway, and it's just easier for game balance, unless it's like specifically like an artifact like devoted to the campaign or something. No. I meant to be shuffling, but then I was like, yes, I'm going to talk. I need my hands to like accentuate all I'm doing. The number of times, because like I am very vocal with my hands, like my whole body movement, and like, oh, you should see me when I'm actually role playing. I'm like, I go a lot into it, but the number of times I've hit my camera like my mic, I'm sorry, in the middle of a recording system is too high. Plot armor. Actually, for generic RPG, plot armor is like a specific thing where plot armor is almost a mechanic in generic RPG, because generic RPG, my campaign, which is all based on overblown like story and fantasy tropes and things like that, but it's like the fact that they are the chosen hero of the realm and cannot die, cannot die with like, because they are the chosen one, prophesized to bring down the Dragon King. Like, obviously having them die to a bunch of skeletons in the middle of a dungeon doesn't make sense. So instead, it's kind of an abstract system, and I kind of want to more codify it a bit, for when I put together I want to put together an actual, like, campaign setting document for generic RPG, and actually codify this a bit. Sorry. But the plot armor, mechanic is kind of like, when I fudge their rolls, like, it's kind of like this scale of, like, how favorably I will balance counters around them, where if they are, like, doing really good and, like, progressing the plot and being great and wonderful and, like, being, like, the heroes they're supposed to be, oh yeah, they get lots of plot armor, like, they're going good, they're going great, they're, like, being sensible, they're being smart about it. But on the other end is hubris, where if they're taking on challenges they shouldn't be able to, oh man, the world's ready to slap them down a few pegs. And it's one of those things where it's this duality of plot armor and hubris to kind of, like, keep them in balance, where like, the hubris will rarely result in their ultimate death unless they never learn from their hubris and we're going full Greek tragedy and they will perish in some ironic way. But yeah. Well, if there's any more questions while we switch gears, because it's about time, it's about an hour into the stream, to continue our reading. Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Never thought I'd find an RPG ASMR channel. Well, yeah, welcome. I've been doing this almost, probably a year and a half now. It's a little over a year and a half now. So I've been really bad about doing D&D content. I'll probably more, like, summarize this video into a new DMing basic series. Fudging rolls, how do you keep that from feeling streamlined rather than recording? Or read instead? I really only, fudge rolls down. If I feel like their hubris is a bit too high, I usually will end up, just increasing the power of the counters, like, outright, where it's easier to power up encounters than it is to power down encounters, and it doesn't always have to be, fudging rolls. It can be, like, they forget to use abilities and things like that, playing the monsters less optimally and stuff like that, where it's not always, oh, I rolled a crit, it doesn't have to be a crit. Like, fudging rolls as a whole is kind of like not using your entire DM's arsenal to the best of your ability, if that makes sense. Where it's like, oh, in this fight I plan for, like, the goblins get reinforcements on turn 3. If things are going really poorly, those reinforcements don't come, or something like that. Conversely, if they're, like, blowing through this, like, horde of orcs, oh yeah, there's some more orc buddies coming right up. Like, let's prolong this fight. Like, you gotta keep fighting waves until I feel like you've taken enough of a beating from orcs, because they're gonna keep coming. But of course, also, you never tell the players you're doing this, because it ruins the illusion. Yes. Of course, obviously, it's like, there's deeming tricks, and there's ways to do that, and, stuff like that, where, the elegance of how well you manipulate how the fight is going, maybe someday can you make the reading part where you lay down comfortably on your back with a pillow on your head. Maybe that will require changing the camera and stuff. I've been meaning to look into maybe doing that, but it requires a lot of cam work, and I don't even have my tripod out. It is just on my screen right now. But yeah, But let us, yeah, I mean, like, you can't expect goblins to be able to operate a doorknob. Like, those things are complex. So, changing gears, we're shifting back into our reading of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Okay, so the last time we met Marvin, which I don't remember my Marvin voice. I think I vaguely remember my Marvin voice. I have not kept these voices as straight in my head as I have the Hobbit voices, but we are now on chapter 12. So Arthur and Ford had just reached the spaceship Heart of Gold. Chapter 12. A loud clatter of gunk music flooded the Heart of Gold cabin as Zaphod searched the sub-ether radio waves bands for news of himself. The machine was rather difficult to operate. For years, radios had been operated by means of pressing buttons and turning dials. Then, as the technology became more sophisticated, the controls remained touch-sensitive. You merely had to brush the panel with your fingers. Now all you had to do was wave your hand in the general direction of the components and hope. It saved a lot of muscular expenditure, of course, but it meant that you had to sit infuriatingly still if you wanted to keep listening to the same program. Zaphod waved a hand and the channel switched again. More gunk music, but this time it was a background to a news announcement. The news was always heavily edited to fit the rhythms of the music. And the news report brought to you here on the sub-etheric wave band, broadcasting all around the galaxy around the clock, squawked a voice. And we'll be saying a big hello to all intelligent life forms everywhere, and to everyone else out there. The secret is to bang rocks together, guys. And of course, the big news story tonight is the sensational theft of the new improbability prototype ship by none other than Galactic President Zaphod Beeblebrox. And the question everyone's asking, has the big Z finally flipped? Beeblebrox, the man who invented the pan-galactic gargle blaster, ex-confident trickster, once described by the eccentric galactopedist as the big bang since the big one, the best bang since the big one, and recently voted the worst-dressed sentient being in the known universe for the 7th time. Has he got an answer this time? We asked his private brain care special, Gaff Halfront. The music swirled and died for a moment. Another voice broke in, presumably Halfront. He said, "Well, Zaphod's just this guy, you know." But got no further, because an electric pencil flew across the cabin through the radio's on and off sensitive airspace, and Zaphod turned and glared at Trillian. She had thrown the pencil. "Hey," he said. "What'd you do that for?" Trillian was tapping her field on a screen full of figures. "I just thought of something," she said. Yes? Worth interrupting a few news bulletins about me for? You've heard and hear enough of yourself as it is. I'm very insecure. You know that. Can we drop your ego for a moment? There's this important. Now, if there's anything more important than my ego on this ship, I want it to be caught and shot right now. Zaphod glared at her again, and then laughed. "Listen," she said. We picked up those couple of guys." "What couple of guys?" "The couple of guys we picked up." "Oh yeah," said Zaphod. "Those couple of guys." We picked them up in sector ZZ, plural Z alpha. Yeah, said Zaphod, and blinked. Trillian said quietly, Does that mean anything to you? Said Zaphod. ZZ9, plural Z alpha, ZZ9, plural Z alpha? Well, said Trillian. What does the Z mean? Said Zaphod. Which one? Anyone. One of the major difficulties Trillian experienced in a relationship with Zaphod was learning to distinguish between him pretending to be stupid just to get people off their guard, and pretending to be stupid because he couldn't be bothered to think and wanted someone else to do it for him, and pretending to be outrageously stupid to hide the fact that he actually didn't understand what was going on and he was really being genuinely stupid. He was renowned for being amazingly clever, and quite clearly so, but not all the time, which obviously worried him, hence the act. He preferred people to be puzzled rather than contemptuous. This above all appeared to Trillian to be genuinely stupid, but she no longer to be bothered to argue with it. She sighed and punched up a star map on the Vigi screen so he can make it simple for him, whatever his reasons for wanting it to be that way. There, she said, pointed. Right there. Hey, yeah, said Zaphod. Well, she said. What? Part of the inside of her head screamed at the other parts of the inside of her head. She said, very calmly, It's the same sector you originally picked me up in. He looked at her and looked back at the screen. Hey, yeah, he said. Now that is wild. We should have jabbed straight in the middle of the Horsehead Nebula. How did we come back here? I mean, that's nowhere. She ignored this. Improbability drive, she said patiently. You explained it to me yourself. We pass through every point in the universe. You know that. Yes, but that is one wild coincidence, isn't it? Yes. Picking up I don't know who's saying this. Picking up someone at that point, out of the whole universe to choose from, that's just too... I want to work this out. Computer. The serious cybernetic superpowered computer, which controlled and permeated every particle of the ship, switched into communication mode. Hi there, it said brightly, and simultaneously spewed out a tiny ribbon of ticker tape just for the record. The ticker tape said, Hi there. Oh God, said Zaphod. He hadn't worked with this computer long enough, but he had already learned to loathe it. The computer continued, brash and cheery as if it was selling detergent. I want you to know that whatever your problem, I'm here to help you solve it. Yeah, said Zaphod. Look, I think I'll just need a piece of paper. Sure thing, said the computer, spinning out a message into the waistband at the same time. I understand. If you ever want... Shut up, said Zaphod, and snatching up a pencil, sat down next to Trillian at the console. Okay, said the computer with a hurt tone of voice, and closed down its speech channel again. Zaphod and Trillian pored over the figures. The improbability flight path scanner flashed silently in front of them. Can we work out? Said Zaphod. From their point of view, the improbability of the rescue was... yes, that's a constant, said Trillian. 2 to the power of 276,789 to 1 against. That's high. They're 2 lucky guys. Yes. But relative to what we were doing when the ship picked them up, Trillian punched the figures. They showed 2 to the power of infinity minus 1 to 1 against. An irrational number that has only a conventional meaning in probability physics. It's pretty low, continued Zaphod with a slight whistle. Yes, agreed Trillian, and looked at him quizzically. That's one big whack of improbability to account for. Something pretty improbable has got to show up on the balance sheet if it's all going to add up to a pretty sum. Zaphod scribbled a few sums, crossed them out, and threw the pencil away. That's doze. I can't work it out. Well? Zaphod knocked his two heads together in irritation and gritted his teeth. Okay, he said. Computer? The voice circuit sprang to life again. Why, hello there, they said. Ticker tape, ticker tape. All I want to do is make your day nicer and nicer and nicer. Well, yeah, well, shut up and work something out for me. Sure thing, clattered the computer. You want a probability forecast based on improbability data? Yeah. I don't know why I've made Zaphod Southern, or some approximation of Southern. I don't know why. Okay, said the computer. Here's an interesting little notion. Do you realize that most people's lives are governed by telephone numbers? A pain look crawled across one of Zaphod's faces, and onto the other one. Have you flipped? You said. No, but you will when I tell you that, Trillian gasped. She scrambled the buttons to the probability flight path screen. Telephone number, she said. Did that thing just say telephone number? Numbers flashed up on the screen. The computer paused politely, but now it continued. What I was about to say that. Don't bother, please, said Trillian. Look, what is that? This, said Zaphod. I don't know, said Trillian. But those aliens, they're on up the way to the bridge with the wretched robot. Can we pick them up on any of the monitoring cameras? Chapter 13. Marvin trudged down at the corridor, still moaning. And then, of course, I have this terrible pain all in the diodes along my left-hand side. No, said Arthur grimly as he walked along beside him. Really? Oh, yes, said Marvin. I mean, I've asked them to be replaced, but no one ever listens. I can imagine. Vaguely whispering and humming noises were coming from Ford. Well, she said, saying to herself, Zaphod Beeblebrox. Suddenly Marvin stopped, and he held up a hand. You want to know what's happened now, of course. No? What? Said Arthur, who didn't know what to know. We've arrived at another one of those doors. There was a sliding door let into the side of the corridor. Marvin eyed it suspiciously. Well, said Ford, do we go through? Do we go through? Mimicked Marvin. Yes, this is the entrance to the bridge. I was told to take you to the bridge. Perhaps the highest demand that will be made on my intellectual capacities today. I shouldn't wonder. Slowly, with great loathing, he stepped down towards the door like a hunter stalking his prey. Suddenly it slid open. Thank you, it said, for making a simple door very happy. Deep in Marvin's thorax, gears ground. Funny, he intoned funerally. Just how you just think that life can't get any worse than it suddenly does. He heaved himself to the door and left Ford and Arthur staring at each other and shrugging their shoulders. From inside they heard Marvin's voice again. I suppose you'll want to see the aliens now, he said. Do you want me to sit in a corner and rust, or just fall apart where I'm standing? Yeah, just show them in, would you, Marvin? Came another voice. Arthur looked at Ford, who was astonished to see him laughing. What? Shh, said Ford. Come on in. He stepped through into the bridge. Arthur followed him in nervously and was astounded to see a man lolling back in a chair with his feet on a control console, beating the teeth in his right-handed head with his left hand. The right-handed head seemed to be thoroughly preoccupied with this task, but the left-handed one was grinning a broad, relaxed, nonchalant grin. The hot numbers of things that Arthur couldn't believe that he could see was fairly large. His jaw was flopping about as a loose end for a while. The peculiar man waved a lazy wave at Ford with an applauding affection of nonchalance and said, "Ford, hi, how are you? Glad you could drop in." That's the wrong voice. I don't know what I want. Ford was not going to be outcooled. "Zaphod," he drawled. "Nice to see you. You're looking well. The extra arms suit you. Nice ship you've stolen." Arthur goggled at him. "You mean you know this guy?" he said, waving a finger at Zaphod. "Know him," explained Zaphod. He paused, and decided to do the introductions the other way around. "Oh, Zaphod, this is a friend of mine, Arthur Dent," he said. "I saved him when his planet blew up." "Oh, sure," said Zaphod. "Hi, Arthur. I'm glad you could make it." His right-handed head looked round casually and said hi, and went back to having its teeth picked. Ford carried on. "And Arthur," he said, "this is my semi-cousin, Zaphod Beeb." "We've met," said Arthur sharply. "When you're cruising down a road in the fast lane, and you lazily sail past a few hard-driving cars and are feeling pretty pleased with yourself, and then accidentally change down from fourth to first instead of the third, thus making your engine leap out of your hood in a rather ugly mess, it tends to throw you off your stride in much the same way that this remark threw Ford Prefect off his. "Alright, see ya. Glad you can make it." What? He said. "I said we've met." Zaphod gave an awkward sort of surprise and jabbed a gum sharply. Hey, have we? Hey, Ford rounded on Arthur with an angry flash in his eyes. Now he felt he was back on home ground, and he suddenly had to resent having lumbered himself with this ignorant primitive who was much about the affairs of the galaxy as an Ilford-based gnat knew about life and pecking. "What do you mean you've met?" he demanded. "This is Zaphod Beeblebrox from Beetlejuice 5. You know, not some bloody Martin Smith from Croydon." "I don't care," said Arthur coldly. "We've met, haven't we, Zaphod Beeblebrox? Or should I say, Phil?" "What?" shouted Ford. "You'll have to remind me," said Zaphod. "I have a terrible memory for species." "It was at a party," pursued Arthur. "Yeah, well, I doubt that," said Zaphod. "Cool it, will you, Arthur?" demanded Ford. Arthur would not be deterred. "A party 6 months ago. On Earth. England." Zaphod shook his head with a tight-lipped smile. "London," insisted Arthur. "Islington." "Oh," said Zaphod. "That party." That wasn't fair on Ford at all. He looked backward and forward between Arthur and Zaphod. "What?" he said to Zaphod. "You don't mean to say that you've been on that miserable little planet as well, have you?" No, of course not," said Zaphod breezily. "Well, I might have just dropped in briefly, on my way somewhere. But I was stuck on there for 15 years. Yeah. Well, I didn't know that. Well, but how long what were you doing there? Looking around, "You gate-crashed a party," said Arthur, trembling with anger. "A fancy dress party." "And it would have to be, wouldn't it?" said Ford. "At this party," persisted Arthur, "was a girl. Oh, well, look, it doesn't matter now. The whole place has gone up in smoke anyway." "I wish you'd stop skulking around that bloody planet," said Ford. "Who was the lady?" "Oh, just somebody. Well, all right. I wasn't doing very well with her. I had been trying all evening. Hell, she was something, though. Beautiful, charming, devastatingly intelligent. At last I'd got her to myself for a bit, and was plying with her a bit of talk when this friend of yours barges up and says, 'Hey, doll, is Guy boring you? Why don't you talk to me instead? I'm from a different planet.' And I never saw her again." "Zaphod!" exclaimed Ford. Yes, said Arthur, glaring at him and trying not to feel foolish. He had only 2 arms and the one head, and he called himself Phil, but you must admit he did turn out to be enough from another planet, said Trillian, wandering into sight at the other end of the bridge. She gave Arthur a pleasant smile, which set on him like a ton of bricks, and then turned her attention to the ship's controls again. There was silence for a few seconds, and then out of the scrambled mess of Arthur's brain crawled some words. Trisha McMillan, he said. What are you doing here? Same as you, she said. I hitched a lift. After all, with a degree in math and another in astrophysics, what else was there to do? Either that or the dole queue again on Monday. Infinity minus 1, chattered the computer. Improbability sum now complete. Zaphod looked at him, and and at Ford, and at Arthur, and then at Trillian. Trillian, he said, is that sort of thing going to happen every time we use the improbability drive? Very probably, I'm afraid. Oh. Chapter 14. The Heart of Gold fled on silently through the night of space, now on conventional photon drive. Its crew of 4 were ill at ease, knowing that they had been brought together not of their own volition or by simple coincidence, but by some curious perversion of physics, as if relationships between people were susceptible to the same laws that govern relationships between atoms and molecules. As the ship's artificial night closed in, they were each grateful to retire to separate caverns and try to rationalize their thoughts. Trillian couldn't sleep. She sat on a couch and stared at a small cage which contained her last and only links to the earth. 2 white mice that she insisted Zaphod let her bring. She had never expected never to see the planet again, but she was disturbed by her negative reaction to the news of the planet's destruction. It seemed remote and unreal, and she could find no thoughts to think about it. She watched the mice scurrying around the cage and running furiously in their little plastic treadmills until they occupied her whole attention. Suddenly she shook herself and went back to the bridge to watch over the tiny flashing lights and figures that charted the ship's progress through the void. She wished she knew where it was she was trying to not think about. Zaphod couldn't sleep. He also wished he knew what it was wouldn't let himself think about. For as long as he could remember, he suffered from a vague nagging feeling of not being all there. Most of the time, he was able to put that thought aside and not worry about it, but it had been reawakened by the sudden, inexplicable arrival of Ford Prefect and Arthur Dent. Somehow it seemed to conform to a pattern that he could not see. Ford couldn't sleep. He was too excited about being back on the road again. 15 years of virtual imprisonment were over, just as he was finally beginning to give up hope. Knocking about with Zaphod for a bit promised to be a lot of fun, though there seemed to be something faintly odd about the semicolon that he couldn't hit at his semi-cousin that he couldn't quite put his finger on. The fact that he'd become president of the galaxy was frankly astonishing, as was the manner of him leaving the post. Was there a reason behind it? There would be no point in asking Zaphod. He never appeared to have a reason for anything he did at all, and he had turned unfathomably into an art form. He attacked everything in life with a mixture of extraordinary genius and naive incompetence, and it was often difficult to tell which was which. Arthur slept. He was dreadfully tired. There was a tap at Zaphod's door. It slid open. Zaphod? Yeah? Trillian stood outlined in the oval of light. I think we just found what you came to look for. Hey, yeah? Ford gave up an attempt to sleep. In the corner of his cabin was a small computer screen and keyboard. He sat out for a while and tried to compose a new entry for the guide on the subject of Vogons, but couldn't think of anything vitriolic enough, so he gave up on that too. Wrapped up a robe around himself and went for a walk on the bridge. As he entered, he was surprised to see 2 figures hunched excitedly over instruments. See, the ship's about to move into orbit, Trillian was saying. There's a planet over there. It's the exact coordinates you predicted. Zaphod heard a noise and looked up. Ford, he hissed. Come in here and have a look at this. Ford went and had a look at it. It was a series of figures flickering over a screen. Do you recognize these galactic coordinates? Said Zaphod. No. I'll give you a clue. A computer? Hi, gang, said the computer. This is going to be real sociable. This is getting real sociable, isn't it? Shut up, said Zaphod, and show us the screens. Light on the bridge sank. Pinpoints of light played across the consoles and reflected in 4 pairs of eyes that stared up at the external monitor screens. There was absolutely nothing on them. Recognize that? Whispered Zaphod. Ford frowned. No, he said. Well, what do you see? Nothing. Recognize it? What are you talking about? We're in the Horsehead Nebula. One whole vast dark cloud. And what is it I'm supposed to be recognizing from a blank screen? Inside a dark nebula is the only place in a galaxy you'll see a dark screen. Very good. Zaphod laughed. He was clearly very excited about something, almost childly so. Hey, this is really terrific. Really way too much. So what's it got to be? Well, so what's so great about being stuck in a dust cloud? Thanks. Said Ford. What do you reckon there is to find there? Nothing. No stars? No planets? No. Computer, shouted Zaphod. Rotate the angle of vision 180 degrees and don't talk about it. For a moment, it seemed to me that nothing had happened. Then a small brightness glowed to the edge of the huge screen. A red star the size of a small plate crept across it, following quickly by another. A binary system. Then a vast crescent slid into the corner of the picture, a red glare shading away into a deep black, the night side of the planet. I found it, cried Zaphod, thumping the console. I've found it. Ford Zaphod stared in astonishment. What is it? That, said Zaphod, is the most improbable planet that ever existed. Chapter 15. Excerpt from the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, page 634,784, section 5A, entry Magrathea. Far back in the mists of ancient time, in the great and glorious days of the former galactic empire, life was wild, rich, and largely tax-free. Mighty starships plied their way between exotic suns, seeking adventure and reward among the farthest reaches of galactic space. In those days, spirits were brave, the stakes were high, men were real men, women were real women, and small furry creatures from Alpha Centauri were real small furry creatures from Alpha Centauri. And all who dared to brave the unknown terrors, to do mighty deeds, to boldly split infinities that no man had split before, and thus the empire was forged. Many men, of course, became extremely rich, but this was perfectly natural and nothing to be ashamed of, because no one was really poor, at least no one worth mentioning. As for the richest and most successful merchants, life inevitably became rather dull and niggly, and they began to imagine that this was therefore the fault of the worlds they've settled on. None of them were entirely satisfactory. Either the climate wasn't quite right in the latter part of the afternoon, or the day was an hour too long, or the sea was exactly the wrong shade of pink. And thus there were created the conditions for a staggering new form of specialist industry, custom-made luxury planets building. The home of this industry was the planet Magrathea, whose hyperspatial engineers suck matter through white holes in space to form into dream planets, gold planets, platinum planets, soft rubber planets with lots of earthquakes. Oh. Oops. all lovingly made to meet the exacting standards that the galaxy's richest men naturally came to expect. But so successful was the venture that Magrathea soon itself became the richest planet of all time, and the rest of the galaxy was reduced to abject poverty. And so the system broke down, the empire collapsed, and the long, sullen silence settled over the billion angry, hungry worlds, disturbed by only the prim scratchings of scholars as they labored into the night over smug little treatises on the value of planned political economy. Magrathea itself disappeared, and its memory soon passed into the obscurity of legend. In these enlightened days, of course, no one believes a word of it. And with that, I think we are going to call it a night here. Thank you for everyone for coming and hanging out with the stream. I really I love doing these, and it was a lot of fun. So, as always, if you have any suggestions for like topics for like the first part of the streams, you can let me know on the Discord, which you should hang out. I don't think I have a link in the description of these streams, but they are in the description of like every other video. So yeah, we have a great community there, and hang out if you want to talk to me. That's probably the best place to do it. But yeah, no, thank you for coming, and I hope you all have a wonderful, wonderful night, and as always, may your story smile upon you.